Hi, Misha here, and in our recent Q&A, Jan and I both said we really enjoy shooting Makarovs when it comes to surplus pistols, or even pistols in general. So I thought, let's do kind of a guide to 9x18 caliber guns. Little bit of a tip and differences and just some fun facts and just looking at them. And I've laid out 12 different ones here. 12 might seem like a huge number, but really for a long time you could pick most Makarovs up very affordably. So it was something most people could get into without a financial burden of note. And I'm no exception. In fact, that's why I bought my first couple of Makarovs. I could afford them on a grad student's, I would say budget, but that's not even a thing. I would say salary, that's not a thing. I don't know, scrapings together from couch change, maybe? So yeah, let's just talk about them here. Here on this, we have really the original Makarov PMs. Over here we have the PMM, or the semi-automatic version, the IJ-18 AH. And then for fun, I thought I would bring out the Walther, there we go, PP Super, because it is technically 9x18 and it has a common ancestor with the Russian 9x18, although they're not interchangeable. And then we'll move over to foreign countries that adopted the caliber 9x18 PM, but not the gun itself. So here we have two from Hungary, made by FEG. The the PA-63, full-size kind of military version. And then this is an SMC-918, but it's basically, sorry guys, it's basically RK59/R61 export variant. Then we have the guns from Poland. We have the original P-64, a little gun. The enlarged PA-83. And then, because it really actually explains the P-64 and the decisions made around it, I brought out the PM-63 here. The submachine gun / PDW / pistol. And then finally, we'll wrap things up with the one 9x18 caliber gun that we were given thanks to Czechoslovakia, the VZ82. So, what are the features of these? How are they similar? How are they different? Pros, cons, neat little facts, shortcomings, like I said. I don't know, we'll just kind of compare and contrast and hang out for a bit talking about Makarovs. So let's get into it. Now, I talked about why the Walther PP Super came to be in a recent video where I did a 101 on the PP and PPK. It's a neat gun. This was made in the 70s, but it dates back to the 1940s, even late 1930s, when the German Luftwaffe, the Air Force, wanted a simple, lightweight, dependable sidearm to equip their air crews with. So that's where the original 9x18 cartridge came from. It was called 9mm Ultra. Now you have 9x17, which is 380 9mm Kurs. But 9x18 was just a little bit heavier, a little more oomph, a little more stopping power at close range. it was about as much as they could do in a simple blowback gun. And the original prototypes and test models, sorry guys, just arranging you up a bit here, were just that. Like this one, they were straight blowback. They would have been double single action. But it never went much of anywhere, but the concept was out there. Now, in Germany, they would revisit it, or West Germany, I should say, in the 70s to try to make a more powerful police gun. And they would take the 9x18 Ultra, update it to 9x18 Police. But it really wouldn't take off there. Walther would just make a few of these, and only a couple of other companies would make guns in 9mm Police. So it had a very brief life in the 70s. But in Russia, the Luftwaffe research kind of inspired people. One of them was Nikolai Makarov. In 1945, the Red Army first expressed interest in a new sidearm to replace the TT-33 Tokarev. Tokarev wasn't exactly old at that point, but it fired the very powerful 7.62 by 25 cartridge. And it was a little large itself, and they wanted something that was easier and cheaper to mass produce, that was smaller and more accurate than the Tokarev, and was at least as reliable and durable. And it had to be in 7.62/7.65 or 9mm caliber. So Mr. Makarov, or Comrade Makarov, essentially started with the Walther PPK, greatly simplified it, and made his own version of 9x18 Ultra, known as 9mm Makarov, 9mm PM. And production would begin very low rate at Izhevsk in 1949, and then in 1951, it would be fully adopted and go into full production. But the reason this all took so much time, this was a very low priority following World War II. It was seen as a defensive gun, a sidearm. They had plenty of leftover Tokarevs. But it's, the idea was, yeah, this is a more simple gun than the Tokarev, easier to carry. They could make a lot of these. It was also much better suited for police. The 9x18 Makarov round actually has a good bit of oomph at close range, 15 to 25 meters. Further than that, but that wasn't the point. It was a defensive gun. The original pistol here, the PM, is about 6 1/3 inches long. It has a barrel just under 3.85 inches. And it weighs about 26 ounces. It weighs so much because it's all steel. It's simple blowback. It does have an external slide release, and it does have a decocker borrowed from the Walther, but it's reversed. Up is on, down is off. A reasonable single, double. I know I did that in reverse, but you'll live. Pistol, trigger, kind of a neat wraparound grip. Single piece with one big, it's a square screw, which is fun. Heel release for the mag here. Simple but reliable and cheap to produce. 8-round mag. It's actually kind of inspired by a lot of Beretta's pistol mags with the open sides. Very easy to disassemble. This trigger guard spring loaded. Just kind of pull it down, push it to the side, pull your slide back. Here you go. The barrel is fixed to the frame. Lock works all here. And then your slide is, again, pretty simple. It has a floating firing pin. And they figured this was okay because it's so light that even being slammed down, it's not enough inertia to set off a primer. Plus, these are using relatively hard military primers. But it was a way to save a part. And that was kind of the name of the game with the Makarov here. It only had 27 parts. And of those, a majority did double duty, and a couple even do triple duty. And pretty much everything is machined steel, of course, except for the Bakelite style, which isn't really Bakelite, but grips. Just a very dependable pistol. When I was getting into guns, and I was getting my first one, a friend at the time told me that this is back when they were very cheap, and this friend had money, let's say. He threw one out of a car window going very fast. I'm not saying it was a responsible thing to do. It was not. It was dumb, but hey, young, and he was kind of that way. Anyway, he went back on the road, picked it up. The grip was, shattered. He put it back together with duct tape. But the rest of the gun was just fine and shot just fine. These guns are built like tanks. Anyway, in Russia, this was made at Izhevsk. And it took a while to really re-equip the army, but it would eventually replace the Tokarev, beginning in the mid-50s, really. And by the late 50s, it mostly replaced it. And then it started to be in widespread use with the Russian militia, the Russian police, and other more private security type things. So it was a slow but steady phase out in favor. And after Russia started to have enough, like most Comblock things, they started exporting the gun. But not many countries actually produced a real Makarov. And only 12 countries officially adopted it, at least for standard issue. Considered one of the best made ones, we have East Germany, the DDR. The Ernst Thälmann factory began production of these in the very late 1950s. And it's an exact copy of Russian, except the grips are a little different. No star and no lanyard staple. But everything else is the same here. These are known for being very well made. Very smooth. Good trigger in single. Even a very good trigger in double. Often very nice bluing. But otherwise, identical, really. Right around the same time, another country that adopted and began production was China, with their Type 59, as they called it. This was another exact copy, although, at least later on, they used salt bluing as opposed to the more elegant kind of rust bluing type. Now, this is, of course, an export version. We started to receive these for a brief time around 1990 here. Most you find in America are in 380. This is still in Makarov. And this has the little thumb rest grip here. Because of the points system in 1968, the Gun Control Act established points to make pistols importable. And the Makarov didn't have quite enough points, so something had to be done. And what a lot of guns would have, including a lot of surplus guns, they would just install a thumb rest grip. And once in the USA, it was perfectly legal to swap it for a standard military grip. Sometimes they'd even include the original grip in the box. And that's what happened here with these guns, Bulgarian Makarovs. A little bit later on, in fact, it was one of the last countries to start making them, Arsenal of Bulgaria, Circle 10, made its own Makarov. Again, an exact copy of Russian. These are just as well made as any of the others, but some say they don't have quite as nice fit and finish. I think it just depends on when and where you get them. A lot of the ones we have are in very good shape. But yeah, they're not significantly less attractive than, say, East German, Chinese, or even Russian. But yeah, I think most would agree they're maybe a little bit rougher of the mix. You can see this one has the larger star. That would change on several models over several times. By the way, East Germany, they would call this the Pistol M, the Pistol Makarov. In Russia, like I said, it was the PM. In China, it was the Type 59. These were just kind of generically labeled under the Norinco brand. Chinese Type 59 Makarov. I love those double action pulls. Chinese Type 59 Makarov. First trigger pull. Single action's nice. Funnily enough, China would continue producing the Type 54, their Tokarev, long after going to the Makarov, so they made both concurrently. And the only other country to officially produce the original PM was actually Germany. We had East Germany, but after unification, a few would be built from existing components in Germany, just basically to stir up some money. Something similar would happen in Bulgaria, although of course the nations wouldn't change its name. Arsenal AD, Circle 10, would make small runs in the late 90s and early 2000s. These are kind of more commercial ones. Speaking of commercial, this is not, strictly speaking, an exact Makarov, but this is a Russian. This is an IJ-18AH. This is a Russian commercial gun. And instead of having a thumb rest grip, the Russian guns would usually have the adjustable sight, known as a target sight. Unfortunately, while you could remove this, the slide is modified for it. Oh well. And this one features a 12 round, later it would be 10 after the 94 assault weapons ban, magazine. Kind of an interesting design, solid body here, and then more traditional up top. There are a couple of styles of this. I should have grabbed another one, but oh well. But one neat thing about it, notice we have this kind of double column leading up to single here. Because of that, original 8-round mags will actually fit and work perfectly in these. It's one of the few double stack guns that is cross-compatible with single stack mags. In fact, some companies are making enlarged base plates for the single stack mag so you could put them in, because the double stackers are pretty rare. The 10s are hard to get, the 12s are even more difficult. So it was a thing. Now this is a commercial gun. Notice the checkered front strap. Interestingly, the frame, the steel frame, is phosphate, but the slide is blued. And we have a lanyard staple on the bottom now. Anyway, this came about, the whole design, even though this is commercial, it's based on the military PMM. This was developed at Izhevsk, soon to be Izhmash, in the late 80s, and was first shown off in 1990. And this was to be an improved version, but on a budget. Essentially, you go from 8 rounds to 12. They had a few things like the phosphated frame, but most importantly, it had a new fluted chamber, and that was to work with a new 9x18 loading, 9mm PMM. Essentially, they lightened the bullet, gave it a higher powder charge, and they claimed it was up to 25% more effective, more energy, whatnot. Unfortunately, only a handful were really used by the Russian military, more or less for trials. Russian police did acquire some, and some were exported, but all in all, it was essentially a non-starter. That was kind of the last gasp, at least in the Soviet Union, for the Makarov. In most of the other countries, production was over around the same time. But yeah, these all have the same features. They're all 26 ounces, although of course this one weighs a little more. It's 29, I believe. Yeah, and they're all just pretty much exact copies of a theme, with production kind of lasting 50s, 60s, and into the 70s, in some instances into the 80s. We'll talk more about importation into the USA a bit later on. But what about the other nations? People often call these Makarovs, but that's not really true. If you call these Makarov pistols, it's like calling every gun that shoots 45 ACP a 1911. They just share the same cartridge. But these are produced and even have different origins. So, let's check out what Hungary got up to, because it was one of the first. So the PA-63, once a very common and very affordable little gun. Hungary was really, I think, the first nation to develop a gun chambered for 9x18, but not actually just adopt the Makarov. But before we talk about the 63, let's talk about this. Now this is the SMC-918, so it's a commercial version, brought over in the 80s. But it's pretty much the same as, originally we started off with what was known as the RK-59. This was developed not for the military, but for Hungarian police. Now, after World War II, FEG in Hungary was producing a clone copy inspirational gun from the Walther PPK, known as the 48M. And this was chambered for, of course, 7.65-32. So they already knew how to make a PPK, and that's pretty much what they started with. And while the lock work and everything is altered, this gun is much closer to the original Walther than the Makarov. So the police were needing a lightweight, compact gun for carry, especially concealed carry type thing. So what FEG came up with had quite a short barrel, a little under 3.5 inches. The gun itself weighed under 20 ounces, and it was about 6 inches long. And they were able to achieve the lightweight because they went to an aluminum alloy frame. Still had a steel slide, of course. It had a Walther style mag release, so a push button, not the heel release. 6-round detaching mag, single stack. Notice it's a very different pattern from the Makarov. The front of the grip is pretty straight, but the back has a decent curve to it. Double, single action. Decent trigger. Trigger is ribbed. Hammer is round. Fixed sights. Last round holdback, but no release. Same as the Walther. It does hold itself open though. It's not one of those wacky guns that holds open on the mag. But to release it, you just, not a big deal. It does have a decocker. But like the original PPK, down is safe, up is on. Very, very similar. Well, the police tried out the RK-59 and really liked its size and lightweight. What they didn't like was the fact that the new fancy alloy frame was prone to warping, cracking, and otherwise deforming. This would lead to the R61, which was essentially the same exact gun, but they added a small amount of titanium to the alloy mix just to give it that little bit of extra rigidity and stability, and that did the trick. And while the R61 was never built in massive numbers, it would go on to equip police up through the really early 2000s, and even some military officers would acquire them, and that would lead to the PA-63 here, which is the same gun, alloy frame, more of a curve now, longer grip, but it's 7 rounds versus 8 on the Makarov. By the way, these finger rest grips are not for import. Originally, a lot of the Hungarian guns had slab grips, but they actually added it themselves for comfort. Same disassembly like a Makarov. Pull the trigger down, again, because it's inspired by the Walther. But the big deal is here, this is actually the Makarov with the longest barrel. It's nearly 4 inches, meaning the gun's overall length is nearly 7 inches. But because of this alloy frame and somewhat shortened grip, overall weight is just a little over 21 ounces. Pretty good. By the way, they would leave the frames for the PA-63s, at least the military ones, in kind of the natural metal. They would offer anodized versions for export, though, which is why this one has it. They would also do a version in 32, 7.65. But this was a standard issue gun in Hungary, the Hungarian army, up through the 1990s. And it is lighter weight, a little more ergonomic grip. A lot of Americans like the Browning-style mag release. And while it is plenty durable, it is, of course, not as durable, not as bulletproof as the original all-steel Makarov. And the quality control in these, while good, back when these were being imported en masse, there were some kind of glitches and things. So, good guns, but they got a little bit of a mixed reputation during the import cycle. And that's why they actually were among the cheaper 9x18 guns for a long time. But we'll do more of a head-to-head comparison with all of these at the end here. And with that, we'll move on to Jay's favorite country, Poland. It's a long, heavy first pull. And the second slide. And slide open, but no release. Let's try a single action. The story in Poland actually gets kind of interesting. The P-64, again, was its own development. And this is mechanically the most unique. The Makarov and the PA-63 are both based on Walther's design, although kind of going in different directions. But this here was really, of course it was inspired by various guns, but it was an independent thing. Work began in the late 50s, and trials, testing for various things began as early as 1961. This model was a refinement from 1964, hence the name, and it was officially selected and adopted in 1965, and it would shortly go into production at FB Radom, what we know it is FB Radom, the Luxnick factory, Circle 11, and sometimes it's informally called the Kazakh, kind of based on the designers. So what do we have? By the way, sorry about that. Based on the initials of the original designers. So what do we have here? Neat little pistol. And it is little, at least in some ways. It has only about a 3.3 inch barrel. Overall length is only slightly shorter than a regular Makarov, though, at about 6.3 inches. And since it is all steel, it's only slightly lighter at 22 ounces. What really saves on length, size, is the grip. It uses its own 6-round mags. Still has a heel mag release, but you'll notice the mag release is recessed quite a bit, and you'll notice that it has a bobbed hammer back here. Later they would go to a larger, more flat hammer in the 70s, but originally it was bobbed, and the sights were slimmed down because this was primarily designed for carry. Police, sure, but also higher-ranking military officers. While this did officially replace Poland's TT-33 Tokarev, sometimes called the WZ-33 or WZ-48, typically the rank and file, the NCOs and whatnot, would keep on carrying the Tokarev. This was left for more of the higher-ups. So they tried to make a compact gun. It's bigger than a PPK, but not by a whole lot. It is very well made, as you'd expect from Radom. All machined parts, forged parts, nice serrations up here for shooting. You do get a little finger rest. You do have a unique safety system. When it's down, the trigger is totally disconnected, very safe. And also, even with it on, you can charge the weapon. Notice there's no external release like the Hungarians. So you can do that. Can't do that with the standard Makarov. Let me grab one over here real quick. Grab the Chinese. If we have the safety on, our slide is locked. So that was the thing. So the lock work is pretty different. And takedown's the same. And internals are, it comes apart the same. So what's the problem? I mean, it's a compact gun, but not so bad. And it's steel, so can't be that snappy. The single action trigger, notice whenever the hammer's back, the trigger doesn't move. It has a long pull and single, it's a nice break. But of course, infamously, it has a very stiff double action. We're averaging about 26 ounces. Now, some people will replace the spring with a one from Wolf to lighten this up. But I say, you're missing the fun. Of course, again, it's single action. Nice follow through. And this has what Walther would much later call an anti-stress trigger, in that it doesn't move its position between single and double. So that's kind of neat. So what's up with that? I mean, obviously that heavy spring, because when it's in single action mode, you're already compressing the spring. So it's hitting it with the same force. In double action, you're compressing the spring and pulling the trigger. So that's why it's heavier. And that is because of our next Polish gun here. PM-63, sometimes called the rack. Development on this began before the P-64, mid to late 50s. In fact, the original designer of this was the same gentleman who designed the Vis-35, a very excellent pre-World War II Polish pistol. But he passed away in 1960. His team would continue, but it did slow the project, and many changes were made. It wasn't until 1965 this version here was ready to go, and then it was soon accepted for military service, and would go into full production a couple of years later, and was mass-produced between 67 and 77. What is this? Well, actually, first, this is a PAC semi-automatic version, as you know. The original gun was an interesting mix between pistol and submachine gun, much of what we would think of as a PDW today. And that's why the P-64 could be small, because of its intended people. It's also why it has this horrendous double action, because this was originally an open bolt gun, meaning that it used a fixed firing pin, and thus for safety, the 9x18 ammunition made in Poland had very hard primers. So it's because of this gun that the P-64 had to have such a sturdy spring. And the idea was this would replace the PPS-43 and some Tokarevs. And this would be issued to more vehicle people. Tank crews, most famously. Also, artillery and rocket battery crews. Reconnaissance scout units would carry these. That's basically the same concept as the Czechoslovakian VZ-61 Scorpion. It has a 6-inch barrel. Overall length with the stock collapsed in is just over a foot. Even with the stock out, it's still under 2 feet. The grip would fold down if this was an SBR, but it doesn't. It has this big spoon in the front, several uses for it. It kind of acted as a recoil check. It also meant you could charge it single-handedly. I'm sure that was someone's pet project. Fully chrome-lined barrel. Magazines originally were 25 rounds, so they stuck out, but soon they would go to a 15-rounder, so it could have a mag in the holster, plus 3 more. And yeah, this split the difference. So you had the Tokarev for kind of the rank and file, you had this for vehicles, and you had the P-64 for high-ranking officers and police. And that's how Poland went about things. This gun had a mixed reputation, but it was relatively successful and was also exported to East Germany and Bulgaria, who obviously had their own 9x18 guns, and China would end up with some, and of course, China being China, would make copies of it. But yeah, a lot of the shortcomings of the P-64 can be attributed to the PM-63 rack, because we're kind of playing Goldilocks here. This is too little. This might have been considered too big. By the way, this weighs about 3.5 pounds. So, not bad for a little subgun, little much for a pistol. And finally, they decided they wanted to go medium, like Goldilocks, and get it just right. PM-63. I feel like I need to be in a tank.
I feel like I should have been wearing a hat.
PM-63 full mag silver bear. Well, I hit myself in the forehead with the casing, but otherwise good.
It didn't hit me that time. So
well, there we go. The P-83, often called Wanad. Yeah, the Polish like giving their guns names. That's actually because they're usually the project names. In the 70s, they did update the P-64 a bit. Like I said, they improved the lock work for making sure it wouldn't accidentally fire or have other issues. They also went to the larger hammer, but they wanted to go to kind of basically a Makarov size gun. And they also wanted to make it cheaper and easier to mass produce. Finally, in 1978, a couple of proposals were developed at state arsenals, the P-78A and P-78B. The 78B was picked for further development and was introduced as this neat little gun here. Now, dimensionally, yeah, it's like a Makarov. It's about 6 1/3 inches long. Actually, excuse me, this is 6 1/2 inches long. A little bit longer than a Makarov. A lot of it has to do with the more shaped back here. It has a barrel right about 3.8 inches. And it weighs the same at about 26 ounces. It uses 8-round mags that look like Makarov mags, but it probably won't shock you to learn that they are not interchangeable. Here. They're a little more squared off. So if you try to put a Makarov mag in it, nothing good's going to happen. Trust me. A lot of that hang up is this little notch here, which is used for speed loading with the tool and whatnot, and for the bolt hole open. This one has one, but it's just a different shape and size. So yeah, the magazines are different. This is also made with a lot of stamped components. Previous guns we've looked at have pretty much been all machined, or at least forged. But this has a lot of stampings to save on production. You can kind of see it in the squared off front and for the things. Also, it doesn't do the pull down trigger guard. The P-64 did, but this has a neat little lever right here, which means you don't have to kind of hold the trigger guard, making disassembly that much easier. The lock work is still unique. In fact, if you look here, you can see a hole in the hammer. And if you look here, you'll see firing pin. And notice when I move the safety, the firing pin is moved and gets frozen in place. And that safety system was actually used by Walther a little earlier in this gun. There's a hole in the bottom of the hammer here. And when you use the decocker on this, it pushes the firing pin tail down and out of the way. So a pretty neat safety system, and well, very safe. And the gun was much easier and cheaper to mass produce. Maybe it doesn't have quite the elegance of all machined parts gun, and the bluing might be a little more utilitarian, but it's still a very well made gun. The controls have a lot of ribbing on them. You can see it on the catch here, and even though it's a heel mag release, at least it's oversized. You can also see it on the safety. You can see it on the slide release. That's another thing. Unlike the P-64, we now have an external release. And you can see it on the trigger. The trigger is ribbed for everyone's pleasure. And even the takedown is ribbed. The trigger in single is quite nice for military, and the double, thank goodness, is actually very nice. I really like this double action trigger. And finally, our hammer is not just oversized and not just shaped to really catch your finger, but it is also ribbed. So very easy hammer to grasp, even with gloves, even in the cold. And on the top, we have a nice serrated sight ramp. Not ramp, but guide there. And still typical fixed little sights. All good stuff. See how that comes out? That's your extractor. I guess it just kind of doubles a loaded chamber indicator. Never really thought about it. And we've gone to, of course, a new pattern grip. Interestingly, this doesn't disconnect the trigger like on the P-64, but you can still load it even with the safety on. So a little bit simplified there. Oh, but it has a pretty oversized trigger guard as well. And a relatively ergonomic grip. So yeah, this is them learning all their lessons and going from making one of the least pleasant 9x18 guns to shoot to one of the most pleasant. This is also a gun I waited years for them to import, and still tickles me. It's just a neat gun, and it's in some ways better than the Russian Makarov, but in pretty much all ways that matter, better than the P-64. So Poland kind of went all in with 9x18, making a number of guns for these, even trying some exports. They would manufacture the Wanad all the way through the 90s, and only in the late 2000s, early 2010s, where they start to retire these, although police would hang on to them for quite some time. It's a relatively modern gun, but as they became more and more integrated with NATO, they needed to go to 9x19. So let's get to our final nation and final variant. The Czechoslovakian Lazor 82, VZ82. The Czech Republic really took their time going to Makarov. When they did the VZ52 pistol in Tokarev caliber, it was not very successful. Yet, they didn't have the budget to replace it for a long time. They wanted to, it just didn't happen. But finally, when they were given the go-ahead in the 70s, they weren't going to make the same mistake twice. They took their time. They really did what they could do to make sure they addressed all concerns. And finally gave us the 82 here, which was a handgun ahead of its time in the early 80s. And when these started to come in numbers between 2005 and 2010, a lot of people bought them for actual defensive pistols because they were actually still very valid even today. They did a lot. Dimensionally, it is about the same. You're at about 6.8 inches long, all told. You get about a 3.8 inch barrel, so a little bit longer, about the same barrel as a Makarov. And we weigh about 28 ounces. Now, remember the PMM that I said that Ishas came up with in the late 80s, early 90s? The Czechs had the idea much earlier. They had a new projectile that was 20% lighter. Well, not 20. Sorry, it was lighter and had more powder, and it was supposed to give about 20% more oomph. Plus, they purported more accurate. Seller and Bellot would manufacture it. And to go along with it, they had this gun. It is, in a lot of ways, a traditional double single action. It's a military trigger, not exactly the lightest, but very smooth. And we have a nice wide curved trigger. We have a nice, not oversized to the point it would get in the way, but plenty large enough and threaded enough to use hammer. We have a 1911 safety style here. This is unique for that time because it is ambidextrous. It locks the hammer. It's not a decocker. And you cannot activate it with the hammer down. The mag release is ambidextrous, and it is actually very much what Walther would use later in their P-88. You can press the button, it's a Browning style, from the left side or the right. No need to swap buttons. You've got both here. Something I wish more modern pistols would do. The only thing that's not really ambidextrous, well, is the slide release. It is oversized and easy to use, but not on both sides. Nevertheless, for the early 80s, this was a very ambidextrous pistol. So, good on it. Nice wide sighting channel here. And while these may not be, superb sights, they are much larger than the other Makarovs and more ornate. We have a very ergonomic grip for what it is. Lanyard loop down here. And this was really the first, at least to go into full production and use, double stack Makarov. And notice it doesn't have a wacky style mag like the Russian would later. Just a standard double stack looking magazine. There's a few base plate variants. This is kind of the thick one. There's a later stamped one. They did a superb job. They even made disassembly easy, like the Polish. Now notice, can't really do anything there, but if you take the mag out, your trigger pops down, stays down. The reason the mag has to be out is here, pushes into the mag well. Nice little feature. And of course, again, the slide just pulls off like you've seen. One thing I can't show you, but a lot of people think Glock was one of the first, or the first handgun to have a polygonally rifled barrel. Well, CZ, or the Czechs, beat him to the punch here. This had a polygonal rifled barrel, and it was still chrome lined. The fun thing was, when these first came in to the country, a lot of gun dealers, including the guy I worked for at the time, thought they were shot out. In fact, the first one I ordered in, I had him order me one of these. And he got it in, and I've told this story before, but anyway, I asked him where, I sent it back. He goes, you don't want it. It was shot out. And he was just trying to look out for me. I mean, it was a nice guy thing to do. No one expects to see a polygonal rifle barrel in a 80s Comblock gun. But yeah, we had a discussion about that, so he ordered me another one. And this is actually still it. A lot of my guns have upgraded over the years, but I like this one. It's been a good shooter for me. And these are very good shooters. They're ergonomic. Nice enough trigger, good enough sights. 12+1 capacity. Magazines were available. The only thing I'll say, because it is Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, they're not simple like the Russians. The Russian gun had 27 parts. I think this one has 27 parts in like the trigger alone. It has a lot of parts, some of them very small. So while field stripping is easy peasy, if you go to do a full frame strip disassembly, know that you will be cursing. There's a few spots in that process that make anyone pull their hair out. Typically, these weren't blued. For military, they had a kind of a baked-on enamel paint-type finish. Now, they would blue some of the CZ-83 versions, which was the commercial version. Even though this was originally made in 9x18 Makarov as the VZ-82 for the military, CZ was looking for the commercial market on all their guns after they had such success with the CZ-75. Now, most of the CZ-83s were in 380 9mm curves, 9x17, although some were also in 32 7.65. And that's a really cool one. I actually had one once, I don't anymore, and it held 15 rounds. So, that was neat. And these, again, stayed in service for a very long time into the 21st century. And this, along with the P-83, these two are really the ultimate evolution of a gun in this caliber because both are quite nice handguns. Ukraine also produced a 9x18 gun under the Fort name, but we don't have any of those, so maybe one day we'll see them, but who knows. So with that, there you can have a comparison. Let's talk about when these appeared on the market, and I'll just try to think up some fun stories I can remember as I pick these up over the last 20-25 years.
Oh, those run dry so quickly.
I tried to lay these out in something like chronological order when we've been able to get them in America. But this is going to be a general thing, really. The first ones to come in were the commercial guns. You had a whole host of Russian ones in both 9x18 and 380. And you had single stack and double stack. You even had some different finishes. They, over in Russia, did offer a fixed rear sight version, but very few, if any, of those made it into America. These are often seen with the Bakel name on them. But the Russian military guns, well, there's a lot of politics behind why, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, if you find the Russian guns, they will be commercial most of the time, and if they're commercial, they are not CNR eligible. Likewise, the Chinese guns, the Type 59s, they came in for a few years in the early 90s. Not in huge numbers, because at that time, the Makarov really didn't have a huge following. Yeah, I think people respected it, but there wasn't a huge thing for it. And most of the Chinese, like most of their Tokarevs, ended up being a 9mm here. Most were in 380. And they have the finger rest grip instead of the sight, which is a much better alternative. And these are known for a very nice fit and finish. I would definitely say, I think Chinese commercial is a little nicer than Russian commercial. But yeah, the Russians had a few economies taken with them. One easy one I can show you. The slide release is just a stamped piece of steel versus being the more standard machined block. Sorry, my finger slipped. And because it's here, the Walther PP Super. Yeah, these came in. Inner Arms imported some as new production. Those are mostly in 380. And then some like this did come over as police surplus, but were always pretty uncommon. One thing to point out, and I know most of you know this, but just so it's on the record, these are not the same caliber. 9mm police, 9x18 police, is not the same as 9mm Makarov 9x18 PM. Do not interchange them. The German round here is about 9.02 millimeters in diameter, whereas the Russian is 9.2. So you have nearly a fifth of an inch difference. That's not going to work well. There's also some other differences. That's the main one. So my point is, since the ammo for these was always hard to get, they were never popular. And so today the 380s bring a little more, at least in a lot of instances. I wanted this gun for years, and I was tickled to death when I found this exact one here in my local gun shop. 15 some odd years ago. I'd always wanted a double stack Russian. But in a sign of the times, even though they had 150 on it with a couple of mags, I actually had to put it on layaway because, again, poor grad student. This one, the Chinese, I picked up just a couple of years ago, and I did a video on it. It's out of a friend's collection. I wish I had a Chinese military grip for it. If one comes along, I'll pick it up. I remember picking this one up. It was actually in my hometown. I must have been there for summer or something. And it was at a little, bait fish tackle shop. And I bought it online. It was probably one of my early online purchases. This would have been 2003, 2004, maybe. It didn't cost a whole lot. At least I didn't think so for a Walther at the time. And a curiosity. And I got it just because I like Makarovs. So early on, we had the commercials. But then after the disillusionment of the USSR and the falling of the Iron Curtain, a lot of surplus guns that had been stuck in Eastern Europe, not just communist guns, but a lot of German guns, a lot of even British and American stuff came in. And this was in the late 90s, and for really a good 20 years, maybe in on and off batches, we would get them in. The East Germans were kind of always the creme de la creme. I remember very clearly in SOG, now no longer with us, but a lot of other places too. These were $2.99. That might seem like a good price today. But at the same time, you could pick up Bulgarian guns for $89. And typically the Bulgarians would have a couple of mags and a holster. And the East Germans, if you were lucky, maybe had 2 mags. So they always had a very good reputation. And like I said too, there were those German commercial-made guns. Now the East Germans are CNR, but the German-made ones would not be. The Bulgarians were the common, and we've seen all kinds of conditions and from all kinds of countries. This is a newer style that has not a great import mark, but anyway. But there were some Russian guns that came in with the Bulgarians because they had been in Bulgaria, and these were called sneaks because wasn't like they were imported exactly illegally, but again, politics, they really didn't want Russian Makarovs in. This actually was why Bulgarian Makarov importation ended for a year or two. They didn't do a recall on the sneak guns because they had been in Bulgaria long enough, but because of the 94 agreement with it's a whole thing. The point is, for a time in the early 2000s, you might order a Bulgarian and then find yourself having to begrudgingly accept a Russian gun. What a tragedy. This has the slightly older style import mark too. I mean, they change over time. So if you bought one that was originally sold as Bulgarian, you paid Bulgarian prices. But when people started to realize that they had Russian guns on their hands, of course, prices went up. An import marked Russian, even back when Bulgarians were $100, the Russians were bringing $300-400, and a few didn't have import marks for one reason or another, and that was kind of name your price territory. And I cannot remember any Chinese surplus Makarovs, but I could be wrong. Does anyone remember a batch of Type 59s coming in as military surplus? I don't. Same goes for the double stack Russians. I think they were all the commercial. But boy, these were fun to pick up. The only thing is, you had to clean out Cosmoline. And it wasn't just the guns. You could get magazines and holsters for about $10 for either one. It was just a lot of fun. They were good, dependable guns at a price that almost anyone who could afford any gun could buy. And they weren't alone. Some of the earliest non-Makarov 9x18s to come in were the Hungarians. Like I said, the SMCs were commercial guns, although, pretty much patterned off the military. And an oft-told story about this gun, but it bears repeating. This is the smallest gun to meet the points system set about by the 1968 Gun Control Act. So it is the smallest one here. It's also the lightest. Yes, more than the P-64. Although shooting these is less than perfectly enjoyable. Jay and I have debated which is less comfortable, the P-64 or the RK-59/R61/SMC. If you've fired both, comment below, because, yeah, we kind of go back and forth on which we dislike the most. But then we started to get a lot of surplus PA-63s. And as I said earlier, while they weren't frowned upon, they just weren't quite as well regarded as the Bulgarians, Chinese, Russians. For one thing, the quality wasn't quite as high. For another, you had the alloy frame. And so these were quite a bit cheaper. I remember even when the Bulgarians were about $150, you could still get one of these for $99. Very good guns, though, and very interesting. These, of course, would only be CNR if they were made 50 years ago, and commercial guns like these would not be CNR. And, of course, CNR status does change over time. A good example of that, we're going to skip ahead here because I decided to, is the VZ82. Now, these are interesting. They weren't declared surplus until after the passage of the federal assault weapons ban in 1994. Now, that was mostly on rifles, but it also limited magazine capacity, 10 rounds. These have 12-round mags, and for various reasons, they did not want to do a 10-round mag, a limited mag for the U.S. market. But this gun started to come in early 2005, right after the ban was lifted, which would have been September of 2004, so it could have its original mag. And when they came in, originally, they were not CNR. And they were also considered quite expensive. They were originally $299, so like the East German, making them at least double that of a Bulgarian. Now later, as more and more would come in, the price would drop to $250, even sometimes $200. And mags became easier to find, which is important. But more important even, these were declared CNR. The ATF was petitioned with the explanation these were of primary interest to collectors, historians, and even museums. And the ATF agreed, and so even though these guns were not made until the 80s or 90s, and even though they're double stack, the ATF decided that the 82 warranted an exception. And once these became CNR, they really became popular. Because even if they were a little pricier, if you didn't have to go to if you had a CNR, that is, and didn't have to go to a dealer, pay a transfer, maybe pay tax, the economics worked out a lot better for you. So for several years, this was kind of the poor man's CCW. Because, guys, back in the 90s, carry wasn't a common thing. But it did start to become common around the same time the VZ-82 started to come in. Also, Makarov ammo was common. A lot of things converged in a good way to make this a very popular gun in the late 2000s and early 2010s. The same really can't be said, though, for the P-64. These were coming in the early 21st century. I think the first time I saw one in the store was maybe 2002, 2003. And the quality was so nice. And they were a little higher than Bulgarian. That was when Bulgarians were about 100. And these were about 150. But the price stayed there because of its several detractions. Not only is the trigger an exercise, literally, they're just very snappy to shoot. This grip is not comfortable. It's just not a comfortable gun to shoot. Slide bite's a thing. Hammer bite on the longer hammer versions is a thing. And as much as I love Polish guns, I can't lie about it. This is one of those guns that I really enjoy owning. I really enjoy handling. I do not enjoy shooting. So I just mostly have it to admire the nice workmanship and the smallness of it. The same can't be said, though, for the P-83. I waited and waited for them to release these to the surplus market. And it wasn't until late 2009 they really appeared. I remember because I was getting my FFL. So this would have been one of the first guns in my logbook. The P-83. And while I knew it wasn't revolutionarily better, I was really happy. Nice trigger. Good ergonomics. Reliable. Comfortable to shoot. This was definitely a function over form gun. Cosmetically, it's not as attractive as some of the others. More squared off, for example. But there's a reason the Polish military didn't move away from these until 2003, 2005, that time frame. And many police kept them. It is a very good, if not exciting gun. It really gets the job done well.
PM-63.
First GM?
Yep, a little stovepipe.
Okay.
Ready?
Go ahead.
There we go.
Okay.
PM-63. There we go.
And these started to come in at about the $250 price point. And I haven't seen them around in a while, but haven't been looking either. And our final gun, and of course, I guess it goes without saying, P-64 would be CNR. I believe the P-83 might be now, but I could be wrong. Again, I don't really check, so let me know in the comments below. Not sure what its status is these days. And then, of course, finally, we have the big granddaddy to them all. And this was an adventure, the semi-auto wanted to come in. PAC over in Poland announced these a long time ago with ATF approval. But then they had a falling out with IO. And it looked like these would never come in. But then they did. As far as I know, Classic Firearms is one of the few places that had them. And I'm not going to get into PAC because I don't want to, but I will say their PPS 43Cs haven't been bad guns, mostly because they're built with original Cold War era parts, and the same thing goes for these. The barrel's original, the slides all original, Cold War. Even parts of the frame still have some original marks. Other parts of the frame are new because some auto. So I think the reason these guns work while maybe some of the other pack guns are questionable is because of how much is actual original 70s Circle 11 production. So these did finally come in, and they were pretty expensive. You know, the PPS 43Cs were very affordable for what they were. These were not, at least comparatively. They were, you know, $1,200–1,300. And originally, Classic goofed on the price and posted them a lot cheaper than they were supposed to be. But anyway, I ended up getting two, thinking Jay might want the other one because of his Polish. But it actually ended up going to Military Arms Channel. He basically said, "You got to get me one." And I said, "Well, you're in luck. I have a habit of ordering doubles because as soon as I don't, then someone will want one." And I really do like it. I think I've had better luck on the reliability department than Tim has. But, I mean, these are range toys, let's be honest, because it was an open bolt that's converted to a closed bolt. You know, but for a range toy, they're fine. And when they do jam, it's pretty light. It's nothing catastrophic. I always really wanted one of these. And I'm not unhappy. I wish they had given them kind of a more of an original blue finish instead of this kind of matte blue. But, oh well. I'm glad they left the stock on, even though they pinned it closed. Same goes for the foregrip. And I was really happy that it had the original chrome line hammer forged barrel. We know they're original because of markings. And these are obviously not CNR and won't be for another 45 or so years. But you know how much I like little subguns. Certainly by leaps and bounds, at least based on what I paid, you know, things get weird, the most expensive 9x18 gun I have on the table. But it really does kind of complete the collection. And again, it really explains the P-64 and why the P-83 was adopted. I'm not going to say the P-83 was the absolute last military 9x18 gun, but if it wasn't, it was getting very close to it. Because by the mid-80s, the Warsaw Pact was stumbling, and by 89 through 91, it was falling apart. And after it fell apart, most member nations, as money would allow, would switch away from 9x18, typically going to 9x19. Bulgaria is a good example. East Germany became part of West Germany, forming Germany, and of course that's what they do. And even Russia has kind of left 9x18 in the dust. But it was a round developed for a specific purpose, to make a very simple, reliable gun for self-defense. Even the big PM-63 was still more or less a PDW. And at close range, I'm telling you, that bullet's relatively potent. It's a noticeable step up from 380. I'll give it that. And this has just been one that I've always enjoyed shooting. Maybe because some of my earliest handguns, namely a Bulgarian Makarov and the P-64 and some other things, were this. But I just really like it. And I'm glad I got into it, because now you can still find them, but they're not the price of a big bar tab like they were back in the day. And that's what I would do on a Friday. And, you know, a lot of college students would go to the bar and they'd blow $80 on drinks and buying people drinks and food. I'd go buy a Makarov and then sit at my apartment, and I'm perfectly happy. Mostly because I still had booze in my apartment. I just realized that, you know, I could make $20 from the liquor store last a lot longer than what $20 in a bar or club would last. Plus, I could clean my guns and, I don't know, watch Red Dawn or something. I found that more entertaining. So I think one reason I really like the Makarov, these types of guns just bring back a lot of fond memories. But I do sincerely enjoy taking them to the range. They're just so trouble-free. They work, they keep working. And in 2021, ammo, at least as of January right now, is still not easy to get. But 9x18 is more gettable than 9x19. So this might be something, if you have a Makarov, think about taking it to the range instead of your SIG or Beretta or what have you. Or if you don't own one, hey, if you get bored, poke around Gunbroker. There are still a good number of Bulgarian guns. This is a relatively recent batch. These came out of Latvia or Estonia, and they were in great shape. They came with the book, logbook, and everything. Russians, no matter what you're going to pay for. The commercials don't bring crazy money, but keep in mind that they are commercial. Chinese, today you don't see many of them, so you're going to pay a decent amount. East Germans, you're going to pay through the nose. They were always pricey, but all of a sudden a year or two back, they just went crazy. They're nice, but they're not $800 or whatever nice, in my opinion. Hungarians, well, let's see, I'll do this one. The, VZ82s, I really haven't looked at the market lately, so, let me know. There's a lot of them out there, though, so they shouldn't be too crazy on the price. The Hungarian guns, like I said once, they were kind of undervalued, and I haven't really checked on them lately. Just know that they take their own mags, and, they are a little snappy, even the full-size one here, because of the alloy frame. So shooting comfort is not fantastic, but at least they do have the 4-inch barrel and the longer slide, so that does help some. Kind of neat. I don't see hardly any of these little ones of any type anymore. Maybe one day a batch of surplus ones will come in. We have seen quite a few of the 32s. In fact, you could pick one of those up cheap up until quite recently. And as far as the Polish, you still see these. You still see the P-64s. And they haven't really gone crazy in price. You can still find them for $200. There are a few variants in them, so that's kind of neat. And the P-83s, they're still out there, hovering in the 300 range. And if you can't find a nice Bulgarian, typically these are in great shape. And as far as just pure shooting comfort, I would say this is my favorite one to shoot. It's probably the most comfortable to shoot. The East German is probably the smoothest with the nicest trigger. But everything else about the P-83, the trigger, like ribbing, and just overall feel, the big oversized hammer, the oversized mag catch, I don't know. And as far as my least favorite, again, I don't know. The SMC-918 versus the P-64, that's a toss-up. If the thing about the Hungarian, the alloy frame, which makes it so nice and light, makes it really freaking snappy. On the other hand, the Polish, the way the grip is made in the back, that is always dug into my palm of my hand. Plus, we have the wonderfully horrendous trigger. So, I guess I would rather shoot the Hungarian. It's snappier, but it doesn't quite bruise my hand, and I don't have to do a finger workout. Phrasing. To fire it. And again, the rack here, the PM-63C as the Samato is called, it's more of an interesting curiosity piece for a Cold War collection. But If you don't mind kind of tuning it a bit, working with the springs, finding the ammo it likes, and making sure the mags you get, which most of them are fine, are in good shape, it can be a lot of fun. I just wish they weren't as expensive and hard to get, but yeah, it is what it is. There's also a VZ61 in 9x18 made by CSA, formerly D-Technic. I decided not to bring it out. I think we have enough, but that was more of a commercial venture anyway than it was pure military. And there's a few other guns. Of course, there's the Stechkin. I would love to have a Stechkin done as a semi-auto. That'd be great. Maybe one day we'll see something. So, yeah, that's kind of me and the Makarov. I've always had them, always liked them, and they've always been very affordable. And, of course, I have an interest in Russia, the Comblock, and all that era. So, yeah, feel free to share your own stories or even your own Makarov videos below. Just thought we'd kind of hang out and talk about these. We're kind of in the, I don't know, you say dog days of summer. Can we have cat days of winter? I'm not sure. But that's where we're at. So, without a whole lot else going on and not having SHOT Show this year, talking about Makarovs in the middle of the week seemed like fun to me. So, I hope it was fun for you too. As always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, $1 and up will maybe buy us one round of ammo. This is Misha, and Jan and I both will catch you very soon next time.